Mega Man X was a staple of many childhoods if you grew up in the 90s and early 2000s. But after its exodus from the Super Nintendo, the series had an uphill battle to fight. 2D games were being passed over for new and exciting 3D games, like Glover and freaking Bubsy 3D. X4 was a great game and one of the best in the series, but it didn't sell as well as Capcom had wanted, which was especially bad because they had sunk a ton of extra money into adding voiceovers and full anime cutscenes. So for the next game, they decided to scale their budget back a little, and this, I think, is when the series started its inevitable descent. Like I said, 3D games were becoming the norm. Capcom didn't have the same faith in the series' success as they previously had, and with them venturing into new IPs like the Battle Network series, making quality X games just didn't seem to be a priority anymore. If you haven't already watched The Rise of Mega Man X, go watch it now. It covers everything leading up to Mega Man X4, and this video is going to cover the remaining games. That is, X5-X8 and the spin-off titles. I'm going to talk more about why the Mega Man X series fell throughout this video, but generally speaking, I wanted to point out that I do still really like most of these games, and believe there's a lot of fun to be had with them, even if they're objectively worse than X1 through 4. There were a lot of circumstantial and technical reasons why these games failed to live up to people's expectations, and I'll dive into all of that during the video. With all that being said, sit back, relax, and enjoy this deep dive. We're going to start with the game that was most pivotal to whether the X series would survive or crumble. But first, I have 3 exciting announcements. The first is that I am sick with a cold. That's not an exciting announcement, but it does explain why my audio might sound bad for the next minute or so. The second exciting announcement is that I hit 10,000 subscribers. That was my goal for the end of the year, and it looks like I've made it with just a little bit of time to spare. Huzzah! I would encourage everyone to not suddenly unsubscribe as a prank, even though that would be pretty funny. The third exciting announcement is that I have my first sponsor, which means I could finally make use of this graphic. Today's sponsor is Mecha Japan. Mecha Japan is an online store that sells over 30,000 high-quality products from major Japanese licenses such as Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Dragon Ball, and more. But most importantly, they have Mega Man X merch. Get yourself this amazing X figure, or this Axel figure. They even have Black Armor Zero, you guys. They've got the Mega Man X Anniversary soundtrack. They've got the original Famicom games. They've got Falcon Armor X, that's so cool. Mecha Japan has a treasure trove of toys and collectibles from other Mega Man series as well. I, for one, am going to grab myself some of these figures before they sell out, and I'd suggest you guys get in while the get-in's good. Use code WESTDOES10 for a discount for a limited time. Mecha Japan ships worldwide, has great customer service, and has a ton of rare Japanese goods that you can't find anywhere else. So if you want to be the absolute coolest dude, click the link in the description and then use code WESTDOES10 at checkout. Thanks Mecha Japan for sponsoring this video. Now let's dive into it. This is the fall of Mega Man X.
No, this isn't happening! There's no reason for me to go on. What? What am I fighting for?
Don't get too comfortable. This is a dangerous situation.
I thought the car was supposed to move us. Wouldn't that be nice?
Can it? Ready, steady, ready, steady, ready, steady.
Mega Man, can you hear me?
This is Snake. Kept you waiting, huh? Are you familiar with Big Chunk?
A scattered dream is like a far-off memory.
Gotta give it my all. Hope you're ready. We can't save the world from a CD player.
Capcom.
Mega Man X5 is what I'd consider the beginning of the end for the X series. Not to say the later games don't have their moments, but X5 is where the quality begins to dip. It's the point of no return, the game that straddles the threshold between great and pure garbage. Kenji Inafune, who had a significant role in the X Games series, had become increasingly more hands-off as the series progressed. And with this game, his only real involvement was telling the team to, quote, finish off the story. Incidentally, Capcom would later continue the series without Kenji Sei, which meant that X5 would create a lot of story beats that would later be retconned into plot holes. But we'll get into that later. For now, X5 was going to be the last game in the series, and so it needed to have an appropriately epic and conclusive story, a high note to go out on. Sigma, you know, that old rascal with his eternal life and his phallic head, well, he's finally decided to crank his evil plans up to the max. He's spread his virus form all over the world, even infecting the space colony Eurasia as it's set to crash into Earth within 16 hours. This isn't terribly different than in X4 when he was going to use the giant space laser to destroy Earth, but this time it feels different somehow. For the first time in the series, there's a real sense of urgency to save the Earth from a tangible threat. The Maverick Hunters come up with a plan: blow up Eurasia using this big-ass cannon, with 4 Maverick bosses holding key components needed to bring the cannon up to its full power. I really like this decision to tie the obligatory Maverick bosses into the main storyline. It makes them feel like defeating them actually matters. Supporting X and Zero are brand new teammates, presumably that they've been working with between X4 and now, but the game never formally introduces them or gives them any sort of backstory. Kinda late in the series for that sort of thing, but alright.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
First there's new Commander Cygnus. Illustrator Haruki Setsugu joked that he went overboard with Cygnus's design, realizing too late that there would be a scene where he needs to be sitting, and he had no idea how that would work with his outfit. When I first played this, I was certain that Cygnus was going to be the real bad guy, or Sigma in disguise. I mean, come on, Cygnus, Sigma, why would they do that? But sadly, there's no plot twists or really anything significantly interesting about his character. Then there's Douglas the mechanic. Setsugo explained that Douglas was designed with a round nose so that he wouldn't be more handsome than the main characters. I guess round noses are considered ugly in Japan, I don't know. Then there's Aaliyah, the operator, whose job is to provide intel to X and Zero during their mission. Finally, a freaking chick in the Maverick Hunters. This place has been a sausage party for far too long. Fun fact, the concept of a female operator originally started during X1's development, but never got used. At first, you'll only have access to the first 4 Maverick bosses. This might seem weirdly limiting, since we're used to 8, but there's good reason for it, which we'll get into later. The gameplay is largely the same as the previous X games, with a few notable changes. Injured Reploids now litter all the stages, and by rescuing them, the player will get a health refill and an extra life. Just think of the POWs from the Metal Slug series, basically.
Thank you.
I'd say this is a nice addition, and while the later games completely botched this feature, its original form in X5 is pretty harmless. One interesting choice the game made was to include the upgraded armor from the previous games. You could choose to equip it or not, and doing so basically serves as an unofficial easy mode. Another feature, if you could call it that, is Aaliyah offering advice to help navigate you through your missions. She'll offer all sorts of useful advice like, did you know that you could open a door? Unfortunately, the drawback here is that she interrupts the fast-paced gameplay constantly with her very slow text boxes, and there's no way to turn it off. Also unique to X5 are these little Sigma virus heads that fly towards the player throughout the game. If they hit you as X, you'll gradually lose health. However, if you're Zero, it will make you invincible. Story-wise, this is a nice touch. Zero was originally evil, so infecting him with the Sigma virus brings him closer to his original evil but more powerful self. And it hurts X because X was always designed to be a pure boy.
I don't want to fight.
How long must this war go on?
Gameplay-wise, it's a humongous pain in the ass. There's no way of avoiding these little f***s, and there's no hint or indication when they'll appear. The game also doesn't ever explain what their purpose is, and yet the gameplay is being paused so Aaliyah can tell me how to open a door? While X4 has gotten a lot of flack for its English dub,
What do you think you're doing?
It's not too late. Stop the coup now!
X5's localization would also live in infamy due to how its Mavericks names were translated into English. Basically, all the Maverick bosses had their names changed to be puns based on the members of the band Guns N' Roses. So Crescent Grizzly became Grizzly Slash, named after Slash, that one's a given. Tidal Whale became Duff McWhalen after Duff McKagan. Volt Kraken became Squid Adler after Steven Adler. Shining Firefly became Izzy Glow after Izzy Stradlin. Dark Necrobat became Dark Dizzy after Dizzy Reed. Spiral Pegasus became the Skyver after Michael Monroe. And Burn Diner Rex became Matrex after Matt Sorum. Not sure if I understand the puns on those last two, but then again, I don't really know that much about Guns N' Roses. Spike Rose Red became Axl the Red after Axl Rose, which, I mean, he's a flower robot. You could have just literally kept it Axl Rose and it would have been perfect. So who's responsible for this absolutely bizarre localization choice? Well, the girl from the big comfy couch.
With Lunette and Molly, a clown and her dolly on a big comfy couch.
I'm not kidding. You remember that kid show about clowns that would be on TV at like 5 in the morning? Well, that's Allison Court, and she would go on to voice Jubilee in the 90s X-Men series and Claire Redfield in Resident Evil. It's through her work with Capcom that she met her then-husband, Eric Suzuki, who worked on the English localization for X5. According to Court, her husband asked her to name the Mavericks, and because she knew he was a Guns N' Roses fan, she named the bosses accordingly. What a weird f***ing world, huh? And since we're talking about Mega Man and Guns N' Roses, Neon Tiger's stage music from X3 is a genuine ripoff of the Guns N' Roses song My Michelle. I'd love to play them side by side, but, you know, YouTube monetization and all that. So, what about the stages? The opening stage is short and boring, and it's by far the worst opening stage of any of the X games. It climaxes with a fight against this weirdly 3D rendered Sigma head, who keeps spamming these bullshit unavoidable plasma attacks, and I just hate it. Volt Kraken's stage is reminiscent of Jet Stingray's stage, as it's another jet ski level. It's also reminiscent of some bull Kaizo Mario level where you're immediately dropped into a hole and die. Fortunately, the Rookie mode on the Legacy Collection fixed this by slowing the stage down, allowing you to actually react on time like a normal human being. The other stages range from being a lot of fun to being cheap as hell. There's a pretty wide spectrum on this one. The pre-boss fight conversations could be pretty interesting, and adds a lot more depth to the Mavericks. Like in Volt Kraken's convo, we learn that he and Launch Octopus were close, and he holds a grudge towards X for killing him.
Can you help me out with her?
Oh, really? We're both
Sea creatures.
so we must know each other.
Launch Octopus? Volt Kraken? Dynamo is this game's optional boss you could fight between levels, but rather than finding him in one of the stages, he comes to you. But he's also mandatory, which kinda takes the fun out of it. The first time you fight, his moves are fair and predictable, but the second time, he adds on this energy tower attack that damages half the screen, and there's literally no indication of which half it'll be, so you just have to get lucky. This is probably my biggest complaint about the game. Some of the enemy attacks are just patently unfair. If I didn't have a fair shot at countering or avoiding an attack, then what fun is it? Conversely, some of the bosses are so easy it's absurd. Like this Batman who just flies around in a straight line and occasionally tosses a bat at you. I beat him in like 10 seconds. What a joke. A cool touch is that some of the Mavericks have a Sigma icon under their health bar, and some don't, indicating their allegiances. X5's instruction manual says that Dark Necrobat was specifically created by Sigma, rather than being a Reploid that went Maverick. Thus, he gets Sigma's icon during his boss battle. An interesting tidbit you wouldn't know without reading the manual. Mega Man X5's soundtrack is pretty good, probably one of the better in the series, in my opinion at least. Here's a couple of my favorite tracks. X's special weapons include the C-Shot, the Gel Shaver, the Tri-Thunder, the F-Laser, the Dark Hold, the Wing Spiral, the Ground Fire, and the Spike Ball. Special shout out to the charged version of the Dark Hold, which freezes time, that's a new one, and charged version of the F-Laser, which shoots out a massive anime energy beam that makes you feel like a Super Saiyan. Zero pretty much has all of his same moves from X4, which is kinda disappointing. One new addition though is the Twin Dream, which I swear is a special move and not an adult film. It creates a duplicate of Zero that hovers a little off-center, allowing you to attack enemies from a safe distance. This is the first game to not include an animation and a demonstration for a newly acquired attack. You just have to guess what you got, which makes no sense design-wise to discard that info. If I had to guess, I'd say this decision was to rein in the budget for the game. X4 were undersold, and so this game had less of a budget to work with. You could definitely notice a cheaper feel here, especially with the lack of anime cutscenes that were used in the previous game. So, I think the lack of a cool animation or display for the sub-weapons may have just been a sacrifice for a lesser budget. This time around, there's 2 sets of armor, meaning there's twice as many Dr. Light capsules. You could collect parts needed for the Falcon armor, which prioritizes jumping and agility, and then there's the Gay armor, which prioritizes defense. I forgot to mention it during the Mega Man X4 video, but there's a hidden ultimate armor for X and a black armor for Zero as well. In order to unlock Black Zero, you first need to unlock an item called Street Cred. I'm kidding. You can actually unlock either of these armors by inputting a code on the title screen. These armors can be unlocked in Mega Man X5 and X6 in a similar manner. Back to the story, the first 4 Mavericks will each give you a part needed to build up the cannon. With each part you acquire, the probability of a successful shot rises. There's actually a running statistic shown here that tells you how likely you are to succeed. However, even if you collect all the parts and fire, you're still likely to not hit your target, which leads to the second half of the game and the remaining 4 Mavericks. Plan B is to launch a shuttle into the colony and blow it up via suicide mission, like so much Bruce Willis in Armageddon.
I don't wanna close my eyes. I don't wanna fall.
Like before, parts for the shuttle can be attained by fighting the remaining Mavericks. Once they're defeated, you'll have about a 75% chance of success, which is as good as it's gonna get. Apparently, the timer actually does count down in real time, which I barely noticed because 16 hours is way more time than you'll ever need to play and beat this game. The decision to make X5 play out by chance was a weird one, because technically, you could fire the cannon with no parts, destroy Eurasia, and jump straight to the end of the game in about 10 minutes. It's not likely, but imagine how much of a buzzkill it'd be to be done with the entire game that fast. Or conversely, fighting all 8 Maverick stages and then still missing with the shuttle. Well, this is where the alternate endings come in. There's 3 endings to the game, 2 with X and 1 with Zero. If you fail to blow up Eurasia, you'll get the bad X ending. The colony crashes into Earth, killing millions. This also causes Zero to become infected with the virus, and it turns him evil. The series had hinted in the past that Zero was created by Dr. Wily and was originally a very bad boy, before transferring his evilness to Sigma. Well, now that he's fully reinfected with the virus, his true nature and power is revealed. You'll have to go through the final stages and fight Zero to the death. Not the happiest ending, but that's what you get for having such terrible luck, loser.
Rats!
Interestingly, the bad ending has some pretty massive implications for the Mega Man universe as a whole. X on the verge of death is fixed up by Dr. Light's cyber elf, don't ask, and his memory of Zero is wiped from his mind. X then goes on a journey to create a utopia for Reploids and humans called Elysium. If you're familiar with the Legend of Zelda branching timeline theory, this is kinda similar. X would go on to create Neo Arcadia, the main setting of the Mega Man Zero games, and much later, this would lead to Elysium's creation, which is a reference to Mega Man Legends. So basically, this ending directly connects the X, Zero, and Legends series together, effectively making the Battle Network and Star Force series the only games not set in the same universe. That's pretty cool. The good endings for X5 are still pretty sad. In both situations, either as Zero or X, you'll fight Sigma, and Zero will sacrifice himself to save X and kill Sigma for good. The slightly better ending includes a scene where Dr. Light's cyber elf repairs X. Don't ask me what a cyber elf is, because that's a topic for a whole different Mega Man Zero inspired video. I mentioned earlier that the development of X6 kinda threw a wrench into the Mega Man lore. Well, the reason for that is that Zero was supposed to be resurrected in Mega Man Zero after firmly establishing that he had been asleep for however much time. But then Capcom wanted to milk the X series a little more, so they resurrected him in X6, contradicting the narrative from Mega Man Zero. They would later retcon this retcon, but that's a whole nother story. Since this was supposed to be the last game, there's plenty of callbacks and Mega Man Easter eggs hidden throughout. Sigma's attacks are a callback to his moves from X1. Sigma's final design, by the way, is so damn lazy. It's a weird 3D render that doesn't move or change. The final fight is against a freaking JPEG. Bonsai Buddy would have been a better final boss design. What, nobody remembers Bonsai Buddy? Okay, how about Clippy? Is that better? Anyways, the final stages, the Zero space levels, are an obvious callback to Quickman stage levels from Mega Man 2, unfortunately. The Yellow Devil from the original series makes a return, but this time he's the Shadow Devil. And Ragnabagna from X1 even makes a reappearance too. You remember Ragnabagna, right? Even the structure of the game is meant to be reminiscent of the older games. We've grown used to taking on 8 bosses in whatever order we want, but this time around it's 2 sets of 4 bosses, with the latter 4 only being unlockable after you defeat the first 4, just like in the older Mega Man games. Mega Man X5 was the 3rd best-selling game in Japan during its initial release week, and critics gave it mostly good reviews, with the detractors saying it didn't do enough to mix up the formula. I'd have to disagree. I think the time limit and the part collection stuff mixed things up plenty, not to mention the alternate routes. I think they did about as good of a job as they could mixing things up without ruining the core gameplay formula. In conclusion, Mega Man X5 is a fun entry despite baffling choices and a complicated development. This is the game the series should have ended with, and you'll see why in the next couple videos. Hey, you there. Do you like Mega Man? How about wearing clothing? If you fit either of these categories, you may just like these new fashionable items on the West Does Games store. First, we have this X design, which comes with all sorts of variations. But maybe you're more of a Zero sort of fella. Well, he's here too. There's even a black armor version which could be unlocked with money, rather than a combination of button presses on a title screen. I've also got sweatshirts with these designs and stickers too, and if any of this tickles your fancy, you may want to check out my other items, such as this Lloyd shirt, or this Lucina sweatshirt, or this Snake shirt where he has the big booty. Buy now at westdoesgames.shop. Okay, now back to the video.
果たしてゼロは本当に死んだのか。再会を信じる X の前に立ちはだかる新たな敵とは。シリーズ最新作ロックマン X6 カプコン。
I had honestly planned for X5 to be the last title in the series, but somehow I found myself with X6. I feel like I owe the fans an apology, but I have to admit the series was starting to go in a direction that was out of my control. I plan to re-examine the situation and be more careful with how I handle the Mega Man name from now on. Released against Inufune's wishes by Capcom, Mega Man X6 had the shortest development cycle so far at only 10 months. Capcom wanted to squeeze out one more game for the holiday season before PS1 games would get discontinued in favor of the new PS2. So what we ended up getting was an incredibly rushed game that didn't have enough time to be tested properly. The game was so rushed they didn't even have time to remove the Japanese voice acting in the English dub. It's definitely jarring reading text in English and then hearing little voice bits in Japanese. The game opens with a summary of X5's plot, the destruction of Earth, and Zero's death. X has taken Zero's saber to carry on his memory, so the game continues X's good ending from the previous game since he still remembers his friend. A mad scientist Reploid named Gate is investigating the crash site of the space colony Eurasia when he stumbles across a piece of Zero's DNA data, whatever that means. Really? In this giant wreckage and he just happens to immediately find it? Alright. Right away, this game is riddled with spelling mistakes, which is a pretty big indicator of the sort of quality you should expect. There is no one else is left to fight. How dare he talks about Sigma that way? Zero has nothing to do this. The dialogue is also very clearly a word-for-word translation from Japanese to English, with seemingly very little work done on localization. As a result, the dialogue is stilted and sometimes makes little sense. Like X5 carrying over the 4th armor from X4, X6 has you starting with the Falcon armor from X5. I gotta say, I'm a big fan of this continuity. I hated how in X2 through 4, you build up your armor only for it to magically vanish in the next game. The intro stage is a big improvement over X5's, and effectively teaches you how to use Zero's saber. but it's also a pretty boring and forgettable way to start the game. Near the end of the opening stage, a new character named Hymax will appear to challenge you. Like Vile in the first game, he's unbeatable, so you just have to survive. He says he's investigating the Zero Nightmare, but doesn't elaborate any further. But don't you worry, audience of mine, you'll soon find out what that is. And you'll wish you hadn't. Apparently, since the space station crashed, Reploids have been having strange nightmares, which has led them to malfunctioning or harming themselves. This is all explained by a Reploid named Isoc. Who is Isoc? Some guy, I guess. The game makes no effort to explain who he is at all. Isoc says the nightmares are being caused by the ghosts of Zero, which, I mean, androids believe in ghosts now? Do Reploids dream of electric zeros? Isoc is kinda interesting because he's clearly designed to look like Dr. Wily. This was confirmed by illustrator Haruki Sugutsu, who said that he was thinking of a certain scientist when he designed him. Personally, I think he looks more like the king of all cosmos, but that's just me. There's also a lot to imply that Isoc is the robotic host of Dr. Wily's AI, such as his hatred of X and knowledge of Zero's inner workings, and his pride of Zero's strength. But it's just a weird choice because we already did all this with Surges in X2. And like Surges in X2, the story really doesn't go anywhere with this potentially fascinating character. They just relegate him to forgettable tertiary antagonist, and it's like, why did they bother? Anyways, Isoc assembles a team of 8 investigators who will end up being the 8 Maverick bosses you fight in the game. They apparently were all created by Gate and worked for him before being killed off before the events of the game, and are brought back to life using nightmare magic or whatever. Don't think too hard about it. They are simultaneously the best and worst Mavericks in the series. They're the worst because their fights are absolutely abysmally designed and a nightmare to play. But they also have some of the best and weirdest backstories in the series. Commander Yamark is a giant dragonfly. Yamark is some sort of a pun on the word dragonfly, and seemingly not a very good one, and of course it's completely meaningless to a non-Japanese audience. He was originally killed by his coworkers because he accidentally started a forest fire, and now that he's been brought back to life by Gate, he's super paranoid that everyone is coming to get him. Especially his old coworker, Smokey Baratron, who doesn't f*** around with forest fires. Rainy Turtleoid. Despite having the dumbest name I've ever heard, he has some interesting things going for him. He's the largest Maverick boss in the series, even larger than that big ol' walrus from X4. He can only be injured after you damage the jewels on his back, which makes the fight extra challenging. Turtleoid's backstory involves him offing himself in order to avoid a shameful situation, which I guess makes the feudal Japan-inspired level more apropos. Hey, I didn't write this shit, okay? Shield Sheldon is a giant clam who also has a shell and also offed himself, just like Rainy Turtleoid. God, this game is getting bleak. His backstory is that he was a bodyguard to a high-profile doctor and failed to prevent him from going Maverick. He killed the doctor, and then he himself was branded a Maverick by the Maverick Hunters, thus leading to his self-imposed demise. X and Zero apologized to him for the misunderstanding, and it's honestly nice getting to see some bosses that aren't so morally black and white. Brown Scaravich concerns me, not just because he's a dung beetle, and so all the jokes about him being a shitty boss write themselves, but because we're sliding dangerously close to X2's overabundance of bug-themed bosses. I don't want to fight any more bugs, damn it. Scaravich was a treasure hunter who wandered into a forbidden area where X and Zero were discovered, and the Maverick Hunters had him killed for breaking and entering. Guess the Maverick Hunters are big, Castle Doctrine kind of people. Gate resurrects Scaravich only for him to get killed by the player. This guy just can't catch a break. Infinity Maginian is a water flea-themed Reploid, and frankly, it's baffling to me that Capcom went with water flea when things like, I don't know, House Cat, Wolverine, Skunk, freaking Horse, and more were all still options. Maginian works in this giant weapons lab and built this giant fighting robot to keep away intruders. I got some flack in my X2 video for calling Crystal Snail a bug, and so I'd like to clarify what I consider a bug. A bug must satisfy 2 of the 3 conditions. 1. Is small and crawls around and I want to step on it. 2. Has a hard shell, or carapace if you're nasty. 3. Has a bunch of legs or eyes and is gross. I know this isn't scientific, but there you go. Crystal Snail is a bug, and so is Infinity Maginian. And there are too many bugs. Metal Shark Player almost beats Rainy Turtleoid for worst named boss, but not quite. He worked at a Reploid recycling factory where he started bringing Reploids back to life using their DNA, which in the Mega Man world is frowned upon, like jaywalking or necrophilia. There's nothing in the context of the story or dialogue that explains why his name is Metal Shark Player, or why it's so f***ing stupid. I really like the idea that resurrecting Reploids is considered a forbidden science. It makes his special attacks all the more, special. He could summon Sting Chameleon from X1, Magna Centipede from X2, and Blast Hornet from X3. They're like unfinished soulless versions though, which makes it pretty freaky. The charged version of his weapon even summons a bunch of Storm Eagle clones, which is pretty cool. Pretty. Blaze Heatnix is a phoenix who thinks he's better than everyone, and who probably has some of the most egregious English in the game. Brainwashing Reploids is lame. Don't you think so? Let's fight to see who is the strongest. Blizzard Wolfang was a former Maverick hunter who led a team in the North Pole and was the sole survivor of a Maverick assault. Wolfang, like Shield Sheldon, was unjustly labeled a Maverick himself and was offed by the Maverick hunters. Apparently it was Aaliyah herself who did it, and as the game progresses, we slowly see that underneath Aaliyah's innocent demeanor is a stone-cold killer. Despite these Maverick backstories being interesting, it takes a lot of supplemental reading to piece together these narratives because the English translation is so freaking bad. And X's motivation for fighting them is pretty one-note and obtuse. Each fight begins with X going, "Hey, what'd you say about my friend Zero? F*** you, I'll destroy you." And then he re-kills them. Throughout the stages, you'll collect these blue orbs called Nightmare Souls. You'll get power-ups by saving Reploids, but how many power-ups you could equip is dependent on the amount of Nightmare Souls you have. Aaliyah technically explains the mechanic like one time in the game, but her English was so broken I had no idea what she was talking about, so I had to learn about this through a guide. Besides the bad English translation, there's a lot of other janky things that indicate a rushed development. In the Amazon level, there's these praying mantis enemies that are just clearly broken, with their hitboxes being totally off. I'm shooting it in the head and nothing is happening. Also, this may seem like a minimal complaint, but I hate how the dialogue is fed to you a few words at a time. Look how much space is in this text box, why is this not being used? To offset all the hate here, I do want to commend the game for the alternate paths they incorporated into each level. The 8 main stages all have a hidden warp panel that will take you to one of 3 potential secret boss fights. I love stuff like this and I'm glad that they added it. The first secret boss I'll mention is Dynamo from X5. He's come back to cause some mischief, just cuz. 4. You can also run into Hymax as a boss fight. He's very hard and it's unlikely you'll beat him, but interestingly, if you're able to beat him, he'll open a path to the final stage of the game. X6 basically allows you VIP access to the end of the game if you're a good enough player, without having to fight any of the 8 bosses. Hymax is down? Kuh! We'd better withdraw for now. I'll invite you to my laboratory. No more hiding. Gate is such a freaking weirdo and I don't understand his dialogue at all. The third potential boss is Nightmare Zero. Once you beat him, regular Zero appears and reveals to X that he's still alive, and you can now play as him for the remainder of the game. So you may be wondering, how exactly did Zero survive X5? Well, I hid myself while I repaired myself. This explanation is about as satisfying as somehow Palpatine returned. Could we really not come up with anything better, guys? I've seen a lot of folks say that X6 has the best soundtrack. I think the OST is pretty good, but I wouldn't call it the greatest of all time. There's a notable shift in the X6 soundtrack from what we're used to. I can't really put my finger on it, but it's definitely unique. Here's a few of my favorite songs. A lot of times Mega Man X6 feels borderline unplayable. Some of the Reploids require you to completely sacrifice yourself in order to save them. Speaking of which, there are way too many Reploids to save. They're just littering every area. Hey, whoever left your damn injured Reploids laying around, come and pick them up. This is a shared community area, you can't just leave piles of Reploids everywhere. The stages seem to be designed to frustrate the player, rather than provide any sort of, fun. I like a challenge, but jumping through a floating platform area over an abyss while acid rain drains your health and enemies bombard you isn't my idea of a good time. And what kind of an evil person puts an enemy here? Blizzard Wolfang's whole level is the definition of suffering, with never-ending snowballs blocking your progress throughout. And what kind of an evil person puts an enemy here? The most egregious of these design choices, hands down, is the nightmare system. So the story is about all these nightmare phenomena happening all around the world. Weird glitches in the Matrix that make a Reploid go crazy. Well, there's 8 nightmare effects, one for each stage. Once you beat a certain stage, that nightmare will randomly attach itself to a different stage. So as you progress, each stage will eventually become infected. I think there's more nuance to how it works than that, but you could correct me in the comments. A nightmare effect is a pain-in-the-ass obstacle that randomly inserts itself into the gameplay. It could be raining fireballs, or a giant cube that blocks your progress, or the screen going black except for this little sliver of light, making it near impossible to see oncoming enemies or pitfalls. These nightmare effects are game-breaking. Take Blizzard Wolfang's level, where the whole gimmick revolves around getting to a safe spot and sitting still while you wait out the avalanche of snowballs to pass by. You know what would really suck here? A Zero Ghost that chases after you and attacks you while you literally can't move.
No! God, please, no!
Haha, like shooting fish in a barrel, boys, said the evil sons of bitches at Capcom. X6 also makes no accommodation for the nightmare effect in the stage, since there's always some degree of randomness to when and where they appear. Like I said earlier, this breaks the game. For example, when I played X6 originally, I got possibly the worst combination imaginable. Darkness on Rainy Turtleoid stage. It's a level where you have to go on a scavenger hunt for these devices to blow up before you can proceed, and acid rain is pouring down on you as you're searching. With the rain overlay and the darkness, I can't see shit, and my HP is rapidly draining. I am completely and utterly boned. The stage designs and enemies were already designed to be cruel and cheap, but now add in this random bull engine, and you've got yourself one of the most maddening, hair-pulling video games you'll ever have the misfortune of playing. Attention! This is an important Wes update. I have replayed X6 from this original recording, and I like it a little bit better now. What changed the second time around? I avoided the nightmare stages entirely. Man, what a difference that one change makes. Without the nightmare effects, the game could actually be fun, something I never thought I'd say about X6. Don't get me wrong, many of the stages are still busted as hell, but some are okay. X6 tries really hard to be innovative. New antagonists, new gameplay additions, and while these ideas are usually not executed well, I am impressed that they tried at least. Infinity Maginian's level gimmick is that there's a giant fighting robot in the background trying to kill you, and you have to proceed through the stage while dodging attacks. It gets ridiculously cheap by the end, but it was still a cool idea. Shield Sheldon's stage has you solving these puzzles where you have to move the mirrors to reflect lasers and direct them towards a target. There's some fun to be had in this game, just so long as you avoid the nightmare stuff at all costs. The special weapons in X6 include the Yamar option, which, why is it called that? Where you summon these 3 little drones to follow you around and fire. The ground dash creates a big boulder you could hurl at enemies. The magma blade turns your Z-Saber into a freaking flaming sword, and it's quite metal. The ice burst lets X create ice cubes, which I guess would be useful if you want to cool down your drink, but that's about it. The meteor rain doesn't really remind me of a meteor at all. It's really more like a glob of chewing gum that sticks to the ceiling and then plops down like a heavy turd. The metal anchor lets you throw little anchors at enemies, which is cute, but barely does any damage. The guard shell creates an energy barrier in front of X, but before you get too excited, it only blocks lasers, so enjoy barely using this one, guys. And lastly, the ray arrow shoots just a regular-ass laser beam, which may not seem that exciting, but the charged version of this is super overpowered, and I may or may not have cheesed this one to sneak past difficult boss fights. Zero's moves are largely the same as the previous 2 entries. He's got his Rising Flame attack, his Ground Pound move, his Giga attack, etc, etc. All the usual moves you'd expect our favorite badass to be able to pull off. Notably though, he now has a move where he could cling to the ceiling like freaking Spider-Man. There's also a move where he does his best Sonic the Hedgehog impression, and it absolutely breaks the game with how useful it is. I honestly don't know if it's a glitch or if it's supposed to be this way. Carrying on the new tradition in X5, Mega Man could find parts for 2 unique armor sets. There's the Blade Armor, which prioritizes dashing and saber use, and the Shadow Armor, which basically turns X into a ninja and allows him to walk on spikes. X and/or Zero confront Gate in the final stage. He's beaten fairly easily. Afterwards, he reveals, for seemingly no reason, that he's resurrected Sigma by a means that's not explained at all. Sigma immediately kills Gate in the typical, I didn't think the leopard would eat my face fashion. Drat, proclaims X, which seems like kind of an underwhelming response from someone who witnessed Robot Satan coming back to life for the 5th time. As X chases after Sigma, he finds Isaac's dead-ass body laying on the floor. Aaliyah comments that this is like the Erasure incident. That's a reference to Mega Man Extreme 2, in case you forgot. Pretty bold for Capcom to assume that most players would be familiar with that game. Is bold the right word? The whole scene is baffling. Isaac just dropped dead at some point with no explanation at all, beyond that his soul just left his body like some sort of Christian guilt trip. Why did this happen, and why now? Maybe it has something to do with Isaac being wily and his essence being transferred to Sigma when he was resurrected or something? I don't know. I don't think we'll ever know, so I guess there's just no point trying to understand it. Just let me sleep a little longer. I don't want to go to work. Yeah, the final battle with Sigma is kind of a joke. Honestly, the whole resurrecting Sigma thing feels pretty tacked on and out of nowhere. It doesn't really add anything to the story, so the final battle really should have just been with Gate. After Sigma's defeat, X and Zero wonder how they'll break the news to Aaliyah that Gate is dead. He may have been evil, but she and him did used to be close. Then Aaliyah and the gang show up, and she's just like, nah, it's cool. I love that everyone's just all smiles here. Douglas says that he's going to continue using his mechanic skills for good. Aaliyah says she wants to develop technology that will be safe from viruses, and Cygnus is like, and I'll just stand here. The game ends with Zero putting himself into a deep sleep so that studies can be done on the virus inside him and a cure could be found. This was the ending Inafune originally wanted for the series, as it leads up to Zero waking up in the Mega Man Zero games. Capcom, however, would break continuity once again by milking the franchise even further, but honestly, this scene could be interpreted as happening whenever, not necessarily just right after X6, so technically the continuity works well enough. When Mega Man X6 released in Japan, it was the 7th highest selling game during its first week, which is not amazing. It got mixed reviews, some people loving it for its replayability, and some people hating it for its difficulty. Despite only being the 109th best-selling game of the year, it still managed to get re-released in Japan under a best title. In America, that's like greatest hits. Despite all the problems X6 has, it does still have some positive traits. And the nice thing about a game this flawed is that the X series can only get better, right?
We bought my son Brian several Mega Man games over the years. It seemed innocent enough. I mean, Mega Man's a good guy, right? But seriously, it got a little out of hand. It was Mega Man this, Mega Man that, Mega. Yeah! But we've come to an understanding. It's homework, yard work, visiting grandma, then Mega Man.
Power up! There's a Mega Man for everybody. Mega Man, all the action you need. Each sold separately, rated E for everyone.
This collection actually released after X7, but because it only includes the first 6 X games, I thought I'd talk about it now rather than later. Released in 2006 on the PS2 and GameCube, The Mega Man X collection was the first time us gamers got to play the SNES era and PS1 era games all together in one package. And I gotta emphasize that at the time, that was a really special thing, because looking at the collection now, it's pretty bare bones and boring. I mean, look at this menu. There was so little polish put into this collection, even the thumbnails for each game are just random-ass freeze frames. It makes the whole thing look like some janky-ass DVD menu screen. There's also no upscaling or quality of life enhancements for the games themselves. They're pretty much just untouched. There are save states now, which, for someone used to inputting long-ass passwords into X1 through 3, this was a godsend. Like I said, these things are expected now, but pretty nice back in the day. There are some unlockables. There's a handful of promotional and concept art and music tracks from the series you could get access to as you beat each game. And by handful, I mean literally a handful, like 8 images and 8 music tracks. Capcom was skimpier here than Chipotle employees post-pandemic. Give me a whole scoop of black beans, dude. Your manager isn't looking. Who cares? Weirdly enough, there's also 3 hints you could unlock, which just explain how to get the secret Street Fighter moves from X1 through 3. The thing is, this compilation was released in 2006. The internet existed already. Why would a hint about a SNES game be an unlockable? They were really scraping the bottom of the barrel here for content. Interestingly, the Mega Man X collection uses the PS1/Saturn version of X3. You know, the ones with the cutscenes. I didn't grow up with that version, so imagine my surprise when I got to see this. And imagine my horror when I had to listen to this version of the soundtrack. For some reason I really can't fathom, the kart racing game Mega Man Battle & Chase was added as a reward for beating X1 through 3. Battle & Chase was originally released in Japan and the PAL regions in 1997, but for some reason never made it to the good old US of A until this collection. This is not an X game. Why was it included? I don't understand why this is here. I can only figure that Capcom originally wanted to add it as an unlockable in the Mega Man Anniversary Collection, but that game already had enough bonus content, so they just squeezed it into the X Collection when adding one or both of the Extreme games would have made more sense. This game is a shameless Mario Kart knockoff and isn't very fun. That's all I'll say about it for now because this isn't a proper Battle & Chase video, but hey, it's in the collection. There's a good amount of minor tweaks and changes Capcom made for each game. There's a pretty exhaustive list on the internet, but I'm going to just share some of the ones that stood out to me. When X gets his Hadouken move in X1, they got rid of his little Hadouken sound clip. I don't know why they did this, it was adorable. After X fights Vile, they have him say, "damn," which wasn't in the original. They actually went into the source code and tweaked the text to make him edgier. I love it. All the slowdown for the SNES games was removed, so finally we could play the later half of Armored Armadillo's stage without the game chugging harder than Michael Scott after he ran for a rabies cure. Conversely, there's also a pretty good amount of glitches and mistakes added here that weren't in the original. Like in the title screen of X2, X's charging sound doesn't go away. Was there a freaking bee in here or something? The Japanese voices in X6 were removed, which makes sense in an English localization. I don't know why they were ever there to begin with. Weirdly enough, the Legacy Collection would later add them back in, but we'll get into that later. Apparently, the collection was originally going to be even more ambitious, with a full redub of X4 using the same studio Capcom would eventually work with in X8, and a full retranslation of X6 because even Capcom realized that it was bad. Remixed soundtracks for X1 and X2 were also on the table, but sadly, none of these changes ended up happening. Supposedly, Kenji Inafune decided to just hold all these changes for the Maverick Hunter X series. Remember, it was originally going to cover the first 6 X games, so, you know, why not just make those changes for the remakes, right? Well, I think you all know what the fate of the Maverick Hunter series ended up being. Which is a shame because, interestingly enough, according to a representative from Capcom, the English redub of X4 and the remixed soundtracks for X2 had already been made. meaning somewhere out there is a modern soundtrack of X2 and an alternate dub of this scene.
No, this isn't happening!
Then again, this scene is perfect, so why would anyone want to change it, right?
戦い、それが全てだ。トリプルヒーロー集結、ロックマン X7。Capcom。
When it came time to write the scripts for Mega Man X5 through 8, I actually replayed most of them twice, just so I could glean a little more info to talk about that I missed during the first playthrough. And for the most part, I was happy to do it, even if just to add a few more little tidbits of trivia into each video. But the one game I absolutely refused to replay, even for science, was Mega Man X7. That should tell you all you need to know about this game. I just couldn't subject myself to that torture again. I try to be objective with my retrospectives, honestly. As flawed and broken as X6 was, it did have some things going for it. And honestly, if it wasn't for the nightmare system that was shoehorned into the gameplay, it would have been a perfectly fine but mediocre X game. X7, on the other hand, is fundamentally flawed all the way to its core. It's one of the only games I've ever played that I could honestly say has no discernible positive traits in any regard. Not a single moment of this game brought me any semblance of joy. Not even a, haha, this is so bad it's comical kind of joy. Just pure, unadulterated despair and frustration. Wes, surely you're being hyperbolic. I'm not.
And don't call me Shirley.
But what's actually so bad about this game? I think the easiest way to explain it is that it fails or underdelivers in everything it's attempting to do. Let's start with the story. There's an animated cutscene showing new character Axel, a member of the maverick hunting group Red Alert, pulling off a hit job on some sketchy-looking Reploids. I mean, they could be raising money for a children's cancer charity for all we know. The suitcase just implies criminal activity. If you think their backstory will be explained any further, surprise, it won't. Since the last game, X has taken a backseat in the Maverick Hunters, no longer wanting to be a weapon of killing. X has always been a pacifist, so I don't know what's suddenly changed, other than, you know, Capcom wanting an excuse to make Axel the main character here. That's right, this is an X game where you don't play as X for the majority of the game.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Axel also sounds like Bobby Hill, and once I realized that, I couldn't not hear it anymore.
Are you stupid? You're in danger if you just stand there.
That's my purse! I don't know you!
For the first time, X and Zero have full voice acting, for better or worse. And by that I mean for worse.
Welcome to my silly stage! Here goes nothing! Yeah!
Zero sounds a lot like Knuckles from the Sonic Adventure games, at least in how monotone he reads his lines.
All right. Put him up. Hand over the emerald now.
Are you connected to this incident? What's going on?
Not really how I pictured Zero's voice in my head. X somehow sounds even worse.
To finish things, I've got to do it. To finish this once and for all.
The opening stage has you switching between Zero and Axel. Zero feels a little better to play as, but why in God's green earth did they make him have a horizontal jumping slash?
Oh my God, look at him. Look at him. What a muppet.
The controls are just awful. Everyone moves at a snail's pace, and the jumping and shooting feels completely off. The game also loads incredibly slow. Everything feels so sluggish. This is making me miss X6. Despite its problems, at least it felt like a Mega Man X game. The opening stage is a recreation of the highway scene from X1. They even included the bee choppers. It's not nearly as fun as the original, but it is cool seeing familiar enemies and bosses in 3D. Axel has a special copy attack that lets him transform into certain enemies, not unlike Kirby. The enemies he could transform into, however, are incredibly generic and dull, and it takes way too much work and it's never worth it. Weirdly, X7 is a 3D game, yet there's no 3D animated cutscenes. Instead, they use character portraits, but it's just portraits of the 3D models, so it's almost like no actual art was drawn for this game. And the 3D design is just incredibly ugly. Oof. Man, even these menus are ugly. Graphics-wise, this looks and feels and plays like an N64 game, and probably would have fared better on that, but on the PS2, it's unacceptable. The levels also tend to do a side-scrolling perspective most of the time anyways, so it makes you wonder why they even bothered making it 3D at all. After the intro, a scene plays out where Zero takes Axel back to the Maverick Hunter's HQ to introduce him to X. Axel recently left Red Alert after realizing the group had turned evil, and he wants to change sides. Mega Man bitches and whines about not wanting Axel to join. They really made X into a wet blanket in this game. He's a total douche.
That's quite enough! You need to back off and pay the dues for your crimes!
Red, leader of Red Alert, says that he wants Axel back. Axel is a unique asset to the group because of his copying ability, and Red doesn't want him to leave. He challenges the Maverick Hunters to defeat 8 Mavericks or hand back Axel, and thus a loose plot has been established to justify our main gameplay. For the first time in the X series, not counting X3, you could freely switch back and forth between 2 characters. This might seem like a good idea, but it's really not. First, it makes the game way too easy. Since you don't share a health bar with your partner, you basically have 2 full health bars. Second, the level challenges and boss attacks really should be designed in such a way that each character could approach it differently, but because you could switch at any time, it means that no challenge is really ever intentionally designed for specific characters. The lost Reploids from previous games are here again. There's no story justification for why they need rescuing though, they're just there.
Come and rescue us, big boy.
Yes, come and save us.
Save us. Get your tight little ass over here.
The Dr. Light capsules also return. I guess that shouldn't be too much of a surprise, but since everything else is now, you'd never know. He'll give you all the pieces you need to assemble the glide armor. The titular armor piece lets X float around like Sora when he reaches Neverland. Weirdly, Dr. Light warns X to only use the glide ability for good, which, I mean, how could he use that for evil? What is he expecting X to use the glide for? The Maverick bosses in X7 are so freaking dumb it hurts to think about. The first is Soldier Stone Kong. He's a gorilla who thinks he's a philosopher, but nothing he says has any weight or importance at all.
First, I ask you, what is strength? What is war?
A method for imposing one's will upon another.
Precisely. Now, no more talk.
And his stage is completely mediocre. Then there's Tornado Tunyon. Capcom obviously forgot that there's a bunch of animals that they haven't used yet, and we're just like, I don't know, have we done an onion-themed Maverick yet? No? Well, f it, let's do an onion this time, guys.
Here goes nothing, yeah!
Splash Warfly's stage is probably the closest thing to what I'd consider enjoyable in the whole game. It takes place on the deck of several battleships in the ocean, and I'm kind of surprised the X series hasn't done a stage like this yet, if you don't count Launch Octopuses. Unfortunately, the best the stage ever gets is meh, and again, this is the best stage. Flame Hyenard is so extra.
Burn to the ground! Burn to the ground! Burn! Burn! Burn to the ground! Burn!
Hey, should we have him say any other lines but burn it to the ground? No, that's the only one we recorded? Well, just call the voice actor back to the studio. What's that? He's dead? But we just got those 2 lines from him. Oh, well, it should be fine.
Burn! Burn!
This is the most broken boss fight of all time. These hyenas keep attacking you to prevent you from doing anything, and they keep endlessly respawning, trapping you in an endless damage loop. It's like the devs didn't test this fight at all. Incidentally, Hyenard seems to be suffering from some kind of madness that's causing him physical pain. This seemed appropriate considering the living hell female hyenas have to go through. If you want to know more, consult the internet. Spoilers, they give birth from their and it's horrific. Ride Borsky has a gimmick level, much like Jet Stingray's stage from X4. Borsky has rigged a highway with explosives, and it's your job to drive your cute little motorcycle around and collect the explosives before the timer runs out. Actually sounds like a fun time, right? Wrong. The controls for the bike are so absolutely broken. Turning is a nightmare, and the only way to collect the items is to basically slow down to a crawl and very delicately turn into them. It's not exactly what I'd call a fun, high-speed adventure. It's just really tedious. And Borsky himself, well, I'll let this scene speak for itself.
So you're the big cheese.
Big cheese? Ugh. How dare you call me that? I'm the head honcho for crying out loud!
Snipe Anteater is in charge of an internet-themed level for some reason. If you think this is going to be like Battle Network, set your expectations lower. Instead, it's a go through these portals that flips the world upside down, back and forth kind of a deal, and it's a tremendous chore. Wind Crowrang. Despite having a stupid name, Crowrang is a decently designed boss, aesthetically at least. The stage involves soaring through the sky and hopping from ship to ship, which seems like a fun premise initially, but it gets old really fast. Vanishing Gungaroo is an interesting maverick. He's a baby kangaroo who rides around in a mech suit. Personally, I think it would have been better if the mech was his mom, so I could kill his mom during the boss fight. That may seem harsh, but listen to this little f***er.
Look at me! Look at me! I'm king of the mountain!
Unfortunately, Gungaroo's stage is the most bland, forgettable stage in the game. The gimmick is simply that you're in the right armor the whole time. That's it. That's not interesting enough of a gimmick, Mega Man X7, come on. It's also pretty clear that the developers had no idea what sound a kangaroo was supposed to make. As a whole, the stage designs and enemy placement is pretty awful. Pretty much all the enemies phase in one at a time, rather than already being out on the map. I'm assuming this is because the game couldn't handle rendering all of them simultaneously, but it just comes off as a glaring hardware limitation, and it makes the gameplay even more messed up. Imagine jumping over a pit, only for a bat to phase into the game right in front of you. This is also pretty awkward looking with the Reploids you need to rescue. They phase into the map when you get close by, and it's like, why do they need our help? They could clearly teleport away on their own. Speaking of which, I mentioned in my last video how lazy the placement of the Reploids was, but this game takes it to the max. Especially on stages like Tornado Tunyons, a very linear level where there isn't really any good spots to put rescuable Reploids. So they just kinda slap them wherever. Here's 3 in a row right in front of you.
Where do you think you're going, big boy?
Come over here and rescue us.
Yeah, and then you can f*** us.
F*** us.
Yeah, come f*** us.
All of us, please.
One positive thing about X7, in my opinion at least, is that the upgrade system is a lot more streamlined than before. You get upgrade points from rescuing Reploids, and you can use those points towards attack, defense, or special things. It's simpler than X6, and it's not essential for beating the game. As far as the soundtrack goes, hey, do you like bland, forgettable music that doesn't make you feel anything, like at all? Well, then you'll love X7's soundtrack. These songs are so aggressively mediocre, they should have their own Netflix original movie starring Gal Gadot. Between every level or so, you'll be treated to these cutscenes that help progress the story. They're redundant and unskippable and boring as all get out.
Yeah, let's show that Red Alert how it's done.
Through these scenes, we find out that Sigma is back and is manipulating Red Alert in order to get at Axel and X's DNA data. After X3 had Sigma at his peak power, the series has done a pretty decent job establishing that he's getting weaker with each revival. In X6, he was a blathering skeleton that even X felt sorry for and wanted to put out of his misery. In this game, Sigma is just magically back and at full power. There's no attempt to explain why. The special weapons in X7 work a little different this time around, at least for Zero. Rather than getting new saber techniques, Zero swaps out his sword for a variety of different weapons like a spear, tonfas, and more. They slightly mix up his main attack, but that's about it. I don't absolutely hate this. As for X, he'll receive the Wind Cutter, the Sniper Missile, the Moving Wheel, the Circle Blaze, the Splash Laser, the Volt Tornado, the Gay Shield, and the Explosion. It's just called the Explosion. X and Axel share these sub-weapons, and they're just as uncreative and redundant as you might expect. I don't think I used them a single time. The final stages at the Red Alert base are probably the most boring and uninspired final stages in the whole series. Fortunately, there's only 2 of them. The first starts with a chase sequence where the player has to make their way across this broken highway while a steamroller robot going 5 miles an hour tries to flatten you.
Watch out! Watch out!
Despite being a 3D game, the developers made the ridiculous decision to not let you control the camera at all. Honestly, for most of the game you don't have to, but in certain areas like Red's boss fight, it could get pretty absurd. I mean, it's this giant open area where you have to jump from platform to platform, and I literally can't see behind me.
Surprise, motherfucker!
After defeating Red, you'll go through a series of stages that don't seem to really have any rhyme or reason behind their layout, then obligatory boss rush, then Sigma's first and second form. His first form is a joke, but this second form is appropriately epic. He turns into a colossal Gundam-sized version of himself. By the way, there's no cutscenes or animation showing how this happened, he's just suddenly the size of the moon. And you have to fight him in space, which there's also no context for. You're just in space now. The best part of this fight, by far, is that Sigma now has a laser, and he whips it out for tremendous damage.
Oh my god, it looks like a huge...
Hacker!
Oh, yeah.
After the fight, Sigma is suddenly small again. Red appears, and Sigma goes to grab him and incorporate his strength into himself, I guess. But then, surprise, it's actually Axel using his copy ability. Did you forget about that? The story certainly did up until now. Axel lands the finishing blow on Sigma and knocks him out the window. The scene is just baffling to me. Why did he need to be disguised as Red to do that? Would Sigma not just as easily have grabbed Axel? Wasn't he specifically after him? None of it makes any damn sense. Afterwards, Axel asks X to finally give him some props, and X is like, "No! Beat it!" And that is literally the end of the game. There is a ton of wasted potential in Mega Man X7 because the idea of a 3D X game is good. Look at how even Mega Man Legends did something similar. Probably the most egregious thing about X7 is that X isn't even playable initially. You need to either rescue 64 Reploids or beat all 8 Mavericks to unlock him. So I have to beat Mega Man X7 in order to play as him. What kind of bullshit is that?
You think this is funny?
In a cosmic sort of way, yes.
Well, Mr. Funny Man, is this how you get your sick kicks?
What? It's just an ordinary... Oh my goodness!
Referring back to when I said that this game fails on every conceivable level, well, it even fails at being an X game because X is barely in it. Even the name of this game is a farce. The developers at Capcom said they knew they wanted this game to be in 3D from the beginning. They wanted something bigger and better than X6. I could hardly blame them for their lofty goals, but it's pretty clear they missed the mark.
Oh, hi, Mark.
They were even planning to make the game multiplayer, but ultimately decided against it. I assume out of mercy for humanity, limiting the suffering down to just one player rather than two. The good news is that X8 is a better game, but sadly, I think this was the one that officially killed the series. Capcom flew too close to the sun, and their glide armor freaking melted. Command Mission was the one game in the series that, up until this video, I had no experience with whatsoever. Besides seeing the advertising for it when it first was released, I pretty much knew nothing about this game and went in completely blind. Fortunately, technology has advanced to the point where you could play this game on your freaking phone, which would have absolutely blown the mind of a 12-year-old Wes. So with all that being said, what did I think of Command Mission? And was it worth the wait? This game takes place during the 23rd century. Just a reminder, the Zero series takes place in the 22nd century, so I think it's safe to say this game isn't canon because its placement in the timeline makes no sense at all. A new material called Force Metal is discovered from a crashed meteor. A mining town is built around it called Giga City, and due to how powerful these force metals are, they naturally attract some dirty, stinking mavericks that want to steal them. A powerful maverick named Epsilon leads an assault on Giga City, and X and Zero go there to investigate.
Who the heck is this?
Hostile hippo, nicknamed Trippo, heaviest chain, best fits in the bizzo.
X and Zero are joined by a hunter named Shadow, who, big freaking surprise, betrays them and sells them out to Epsilon.
Curse your sudden but inevitable betrayal!
X and Zero get separated, and then the game proceeds to follow X as he tries to liberate Giga City from the only brother in the X universe.
It's damn right.
The basic format of Command Mission revolves around the player navigating their way through the labyrinthian corridors of Giga City, speaking to the hapless NPC villagers, and engaging in random encounters. So, on paper at least, it's your typical RPG. I should like this game, right? Right? Well, let's start off with what I do like about Command Mission. The music, for the most part, is good, but could also sound kinda generic, which makes sense because you're going to be listening to these songs on a loop, unlike your typical X game where each stage can be completed in a few minutes. So the music may stand out less, but it's also pleasant enough to listen to for a longer period of time. The battle music is a legitimate bop, though. Speaking of battles, Command Mission has a pretty interesting take on your standard turn-based combat. X and friends can use force medals to change their attributes, but there's a threshold to how many you can equip, and if you go over that threshold, you'll start to see negative side effects. Some force medals may increase your HP or let you attack first, so strategically planning which medals you have equipped plays a large role in how each battle will turn out. X and friends can also go into a hyper-powered mode, where their armor upgrades and stats increase for a few turns. These are basically Super Saiyan transformations, and they're awesome. Command Mission's battles are pretty fun and fast-paced. They're not super complicated, but the standard enemy is weirdly strong and hits hard, so this forces the player to heal a lot and think strategically, which really forces you to use every tool in your arsenal just to survive. The overall visual design and style for this game is excellent. You can really see this slow evolution into Mega Man Zero art style here. X even got a complete redesign just to make him stand out more, and I think he looks pretty snazzy. Epsilon and most of his allies look dope as hell. It was an interesting choice to use more humanoid villains in this game rather than your standard animal-themed Mavericks, but it's a welcome change, especially after dumbass designs like Tornado Tunyon. Command Mission went with a cel-shaded 3D style similar to Wind Waker, and like Wind Waker, the graphics hold up exceedingly well, and look amazing when emulated at a higher resolution, not that I know anything about that. It also reminds me of the Mega Man Legends style, and if you've ever wondered what a Legends and X crossover game would look like, this is it. Now, when it comes to the game's flaws, well, there isn't any giant glaring ones, like a nightmare system or unwieldy 3D movement, but there are a number of small things that add up quickly. For starters, random encounters happen way too often, and there's no variety in the victory quotes.
Hardly a fight. Hardly a fight.
The gameplay is pretty repetitive too. Between battles, you'll transverse a lot of similar looking rooms, and while they look nice and fit the vibe of the Mega Man X world, they aren't particularly interesting and almost never feature any sort of interactivity. They're essentially just empty hallways with the texture slapped over the walls and floor. The same could be said for a lot of the NPCs you'll run into. They're just the same model copy and pasted with different primary colors. They all have similar personalities, so there's almost never any good reason to speak to them, which is a shame because speaking to the NPCs is one of my favorite features of an RPG, as they can help build up the world and the story. Unfortunately, world building has always been the biggest weakness of the X series, in my opinion, and these NPCs don't help much with that. There's really not a lot of detail put into the parts of the game you'd think would be important, like some characters just won't have moving mouths, which is especially jarring when speaking with X, whose mouth does move. It may just be a limitation of the hardware, but to me, it represents the issues with this game in general. It's not bad, it's just underbaked. It could have been great with a little more time, but this is what we got. Undoubtedly, the worst thing about Command Mission, however, is that the quotation marks in the text boxes are upside down, and it drives me crazy. Keiji Inafune reportedly flat out refused to have any involvement with this game, as he believed the X series belonged in the action genre and needed to stay there. I have to disagree with the Inafunester here. The battle system, with its button press combos and extreme difficulty, kept the gameplay from getting slow or boring. If the game just had some more polishing, it could have been really good. But as a proof of concept, at least, yes, Mega Man X can work as an RPG. Considering this is a full-length, 20-hour plus RPG, I think it warrants its own retrospective, but that's more than I want to cover for this video, so I'm going to wrap this one up here.
How can you snap? How can you snap?
Freaking ring is so itchy. Oh my god. Jeez, did this guy owe you money or something?
Be a good shop and get me my lipstick.
I think you might have the wrong guy. I'm Sarah Palin.
I guess Melu and I will just go off and maybe... What?
X5-X8 3月10日発売 Capcom。
In the time since X7, Maverick rebellions have only increased. Humans, you remember those things, right? Well, they got sick and tired of Reploids massacring them, so they finally went, F it, let's go live on the moon. The human migration to the moon was called the Jacob Project, and part of it included building this very, very, very long elevator. Imagine having to climb that thing if the power went out.
What a thrill.
Pretty early on, we get to hear X's new voice, and I gotta say, big improvement over X7. In the English version, X is voiced by Mark Gatha, and Zero is voiced by Lucas Gilbertson. Like I mentioned in my Maverick Hunter video, these two are perfect as X and Zero, and it's sad that it took Capcom so long to find these guys. Mark and Lucas are who I always imagined X and Zero to sound like. Not long after the orbital elevator is introduced, there's a vehicle accident on it. X goes to investigate when he's confronted by something quite disturbing. Look at all those Sigmas, said some teenager on TikTok probably. But surprise, they aren't Sigmas at all, they're all just 4th generation Reploids that all have Axel's copy ability. Apparently that technology that was so important and unique in Axel has now been incorporated and become the norm in the new series of Reploids. Another Reploid appears and explains that the new generation Reploids are immune to viruses, so much so that they could transform into Sigma without issues. None of this really makes a ton of sense to me. I mean, if I dressed up like Wolverine for Halloween, I wouldn't suddenly have an adamantium skeleton or a love of cigars. The Reploid explaining all of this is Lumine, director of the Jacob Project, and who will clearly be the villain of the story, or at least that was my first impression. Then again, I was also pretty confident that Cygnus was up to something too, so who knows. The game then suddenly pivots into the intro stage, an inconsequential mission for X and Axel to play through that explains the basic functions of the game, but doesn't really have anything to do with the main story. It's a pretty sloppy transition. I mean, there's a car accident, X goes to investigate, then the head of the Jacob Project introduces himself in the most unnecessarily menacing way possible. No one puts out the fire or helps whoever was injured in the crash, and then the scene just ends. It's very weird, but back to the intro stage. Between the intro stage being called Noah's Park, the whole Jacob's Ladder thing, and humanity trying to ascend to a higher plane of existence, X8 really seems to be using a lot of biblical allegories to set up themes about its story, and, well, we'll see if any of it pays off. There's a lot you could tell has changed since the last game. For starters, the art style in X8 is notably different. The character designs are slimmed down and simplified. It looks like they're slowly evolving into Mega Man Zero's art style, which, honestly, I think it's a great touch for continuity. Here's Mega Man from X8 and Copy X from Mega Man Zero for reference. Other characters are redesigned altogether, like Aaliyah suddenly has big heaving breasts now. Here's what she looked like in the previous game. And I'm by no means against Reploids enhancing themselves, but really, this design change is pretty much just Capcom's rising tide of horniness finally coming for the X series. But we'll cover that more in the Mega Man X dive video. Would the X series have been cancelled if Aaliyah had gone big old knockers earlier? Who could say? But no, we'd be playing X18 right now, and the world would be a better place for it. Conversely, Zero got completely boned with his art change. They turned his big, beautiful hair into a skinny little angel hair pasta noodle. Look how they massacred my boy. Another notable difference in the intro stage is how the characters move. Gone are the days of slow, rainy turtleoid movement. Capcom decided to go the opposite direction and have everyone run and jump around like the game is set at 2 times speed. It still doesn't feel right, especially the jumping. The player jumps like they're gravity's bitch, no floatiness at all. Enemies now drop these cute little crystal shards for you to collect. I can't explain why, but the way they scatter pleases me. Axel's shooting is majorly improved, he can now hover in the air and fire, and overall just feels much better to play as this time. The game also introduces the idea of enemies grabbing you, forcing you to swap characters. I like that they gave an actual practical reason for swapping characters now, versus the last game where it was just there because why not? As opposed to X7, where the stages and enemies didn't seem like they were really designed around one particular playstyle, certain challenges feel like they require certain characters. Optic Sunflower's stage, in particular, seems like it was designed around Axel's moveset, and you're gonna have a hard time if you didn't add him to your team. In Avalanche Yeti's stage, Zero has an objectively better weapon than X. Gravity Antonion's stage benefits greatly from Axel's hover ability as well, etc., etc. Another new feature is the double attack, which allows both team members to do a synchronized move once the meter is charged up. It's a nice enough addition, but it's absolutely game-breaking. Using it on Maverick bosses will pretty much kill them right away, and it doesn't take much to charge the gauge. Still, you don't have to use it if you don't want to, and it doesn't hurt to include it. Overall, the intro stage is pretty good and effectively teaches the player about all the new gameplay mechanics in a streamlined manner. My only complaint is that sometimes it'll pit you in a room against hordes of weak enemies and won't let you progress till they're all dead. It just feels like filler content. Like this room full of bees.
What's this? A handsome family picnic woefully underpopulated by bees? A large influx of bees ought to put a stop to that.
At the end of the stage, who should make his sudden and glorious reappearance other than Vile? Vile hasn't been seen since X3, and even then he was a hidden boss. This time though, he's pretty important to the story, as he's kidnapped Lumine and taken control of the orbital elevator. Seems like the sort of thing Vile would do. I gotta say, I love his new art style here. With the green armor, they pretty much discard the whole purple Boba Fett thing and went all in on just being Boba Fett.
It begins now, X. A new world will be born.
Well, I guess Vile's gonna be the main antagonist. You're thrown right into the stage select without really any explanation for why you're fighting these particular 8 Mavericks. The previous games had given us some context for why those particular Mavericks were important to the plot, but this time around we just have to assume they're working with Vile because the game doesn't elaborate at all. Aelia won't be your only navigator aiding you during the missions this time. Joining her are Layer and Palette. Aw, that's adorable. They did a small, medium, large thing to mirror Axel, X, and Zero. Layer's design is just baffling to me. I mentioned earlier how Aelia got the Pamela Anderson treatment, and that's great, but Layer really just takes me out of the game a little bit. I mean, yeah, it's fan service, clearly, but why would a Reploid have boobs? Like, what would be their function? In the Zero and Legend series, the line between human and Reploid gets even more blurry as technology and civilization advances, so maybe there's a story justification for robo-boobs? I don't know. Hit me up in the comments if you want me to do a 2-hour retrospective on this topic, because I have nothing better to do. Honestly, there's not much to say about these girls, personality-wise. They are exactly what you'd expect from their design. To make an Azumanga Daioh comparison, because why not, they're all anime tropes anyways, Paulette is Chio, Aaliyah is Kiyomi, and Layer is Kaki. For the non-nerds, these girls are the Chipettes to our boys' Chipmunks. Besides filling out the X-Hunter team a bit more, these navigators actually each have their own skill. After selecting your team, you could choose one navigator to help you out as well. Paulette will chime in during gameplay to give you advice about the stage itself and if hidden items might be nearby. Layer will give you battle strategies about the Maverick boss, and Aaliyah will give you kinda general middle-of-the-road advice. X8 has a lot of strengths, but I don't think its bosses are one of them. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that the bosses in X8 are the most bland and forgettable in the whole series. Yeah, that's right, even X7 had more interesting Mavericks. And don't misinterpret that, that's not a pro for X7, it's a con for X8. The Mavericks in X7 weren't good either.
Burn to the ground! Burn!
Bamboo Pandemonium is a giant panda bear, and there's something about his design that's really off-putting and creepy to me. Every stage in X8 has a gimmick, but Bamboo's stage is probably the closest you'll get to regular platforming. There's right armor you're expected to use for the majority of the time, but just like in the original X games, the stage is designed to accommodate not using it as well, which is nice. You could even bring the right armor into battle against Pandemonium, which was previously only possible with Magma Dragoon and that baby kangaroo from X7.
Destroy! Destroy! Destroy!
The boss conversations in X8 have the most inane and lazy writing yet, and I'm including X7. Each conversation could pretty much be summed up with X saying, "You're a maverick," then the boss saying, "What does it even mean to be a maverick?" and then X saying, "Shut up, you're a maverick," and then they fight.
Did you know that the earliest form of rocketry was missiles used for war?
I mean, it's not like these scenes were ever well written, and the voice acting is certainly better this time around, but it's just a shame to see a step down in quality here, when most of the other facets of the game have been a step in the right direction. One interesting thing, though, is that about halfway through the game, Sigma reveals himself to be behind Vile's plot. Big surprise. And after that point, all the Maverick bosses have alternate dialogue. Optic Sunflower was in charge of a virtual Maverick Hunter training facility. Sunflower went Maverick and has programmed the facility to attack the player. You'll have to go through a series of challenges in order to proceed. Most of these challenges involve shooting this little surfbot-looking enemy that appears quite a lot in the game. A cool Easter egg the developers added to this level is that if you have a save file for Mega Man X Command Mission on your PS2, you could fight Cutman in one of the challenge rooms. Dark Mantis. His level gimmick is all about sneaking through the base without tripping any alarms. I mentioned that the boss dialogue in the game is pretty abysmal, but some parts are a little interesting. And for perhaps the first time in the series, we're seeing Reploids choose to follow Sigma completely of their own free will. I think this idea is important as it leads into the Zero and Legends series, where Reploids become more and more like humans, faults and all. Gravity Antonian. I really don't know how this is supposed to be pronounced. It's spelled Ant Onion. Yeah, so he is just a big ol' ant, and as such, he's got more cake than layer. He's a scientist who studies anti-gravity, and I'm convinced this pun is the only reason they made him an ant. His stage consists of these gravity puzzles that flip the room around, dropping and moving blocks accordingly.
What is this? A center for ants?
You have to think carefully about which way to flip the room so you don't fall into a trap or get smashed by the blocks. It's a pretty decent challenge, and I like it a lot. Earthrock Trilobite is the third bug-themed Maverick in this game. I actually had to look this one up. Apparently, a trilobite is an ancient marine arthropod that's been extinct for quite some time. And also, there are too many bugs! His stage is weird but interesting. You're in a mining facility and being chased by a giant robot that's gone haywire. Halfway through the level, you'll fight it, and then it reverses direction, and you'll have to chase after it the way it came. I find this stage to be a tremendous chore, but I gotta give it props for having a cool concept at least. Gigabolt Mana War. His stage is unique because it completely revolves around you chasing him through the city in a spaceship, not unlike a couple of Jedis chasing down a bounty hunter in Croissant. This level could go one of two ways. If you stay on him and attack quickly, the whole level could be done in 30 seconds. If you let him get too far ahead of you though, it's gonna drag on forever. Once I finally caught up with him, Gigabolt's voice sounds much different than I imagined.
I'm no maverick. I'm in complete control of myself and my actions.
He sounds like a slow child, and I definitely feel guilty fighting him. Still, his boss fight is pretty fun, and he's got a fair amount of unique moves I haven't seen in any other X game. Avalanche Yeti is exactly what he sounds like. I mean, I'm certainly not complaining. I love kicking Bigfoot's cousin's John Ratzenberger's sounding ass just as much as the next guy, but it just feels like we're losing the plot here a little. I mean, come on, Capcom. A Yeti, a sunflower, when freaking lion hasn't been done yet? Or a scorpion? Or a man? That's right, I said it. Yeti's stage is another vehicle level, but pretty different than the Mana War Chase. This level plays out like the Jet Stingray stage from X4, but in 3D, and worse. The save points are way too spread out, so you'll spend about 5 minutes on monotonous, easy sections where all you do is move and shoot, and then suddenly they'll introduce a bunch of instant kill pitfalls, and once you've died, you've got to start from the very beginning. It's pretty tedious. Burn Rooster is the game's obligatory fire-themed maverick. There always has to be one. His entire stage has you slowly descending into a smelting facility via multiple floating platforms. It's a cool concept. There's only one issue. The developers apparently forgot to put enemies in this level. Like, where is everyone? Burn Rooster's stage is interesting because it's the only Maverick boss in the series where the level continues after defeating him. The player needs to ascend the floating platforms and escape the way they came, which is weird because why can't they just teleport away like they do in every other instance? Strange design choice. Y'all forget how to teleport? Mega Man X8 introduces intermissions, which are cute little endurance tests where you have to fight a never-ending stream of enemies until you eventually die. You don't get penalized for dying though, and you could retry indefinitely. The enemies drop medals, so the intermissions are specifically designed for you to farm them. There's 4 different intermissions, and they unlock progressively as you get more and more game overs. So basically, this is the game's way of patting you on the head and going, "Aw, I'm sorry this game is a little too tough for you, buddy. Want to go over to the corner and play with your color crayons?" As far as the music goes in X8, I can honestly say I don't remember a single track, and I played the game twice. I guess it's fine, just completely average. Here's some songs I did like. The upgrade system is revamped once again. If there's one consistent thing in the X series, it's that Capcom is never satisfied with their own upgrade or item collecting mechanics. The simplified linear chip system from X7 is scrapped, and now we're back to an overly complicated affair like in X6. You could use metal pieces, the main collectible, to buy items such as health or energy refills, or even extra retries. This is also how you'll level up X, Zero, and Axel. The special weapons for X are the Shining Ray, the Squeeze Bomb, the Shadow Runner, the Thunder Dancer, the Melt Creeper, the Drift Diamond, the Crystal Wall, and the Green Spinner. Axel gets his own unique weapons, sort of. His main attack will be replaced by a variant of these same special weapons. So, for example, Axel's version of the Shining Ray will turn his main attack into a laser beam. His version of the Green Spinner will make his main attack a grenade launcher, etc., etc. Zero has kind of the best combination here. He could change out his primary weapon, like in X7, but he also gets new techniques, like in all the games prior. One of his new moves, the Tensho How, creates an energy tower that obliterates just about everything, and it's freaking awesome. I gotta say guys, it has never been a better time to play as Zero, except for the hair, that's still unforgivable. After all the bosses are defeated, the player could access the final stages, which is just the orbital elevator itself. This level is pretty much what you would expect, a floating platform stage where you have to fend off waves of enemies as you ascend. Eventually, you'll get to the moon base where Vile is waiting. I'd hoped that Vile's role in the story would have some significance, but no, he's literally just there to be a foil, and the only reason he's helping Sigma is to bring chaos for chaos's sake. After defeating Vile, you'll proceed through the moon base and fight a bunch of copy Reploids that are all imitating Sigma. Not gonna lie, It startled me a little bit the first time I saw one. Fortunately, they're really weak. If they were anything like X2 Sigma, I would have pissed myself. When the party encounters Sigma, he has a few different lines depending on who the player is using, but it all boils down to him talking about the new generation Reploids and how they're like his children. After all, their copy ability is based on data from hundreds of past Reploids, including Sigma himself. It's his goal to lead his so-called children into space, destroy the world, and start a new one on the moon. I actually find this to be pretty interesting. In previous games, Sigma wanted to destroy the world for the sake of destroying it, but now his goals are a little more human, and it shows how far the Reploids have evolved since X1. After defeating Sigma for actually the last time, for real guys, this one really is it, Lumine appears and reveals himself to be the main bad guy, a plot twist I think we all saw coming from a mile away. Lumine explains, if it wasn't already established, that new generation Reploids have the power to go maverick at will. They aren't infected with a virus, but they can copy the thoughts and bodies of previous Reploids who were infected. Thus, they could empathize with their maverick views, but still, ultimately, they are making a conscious decision to align themselves with evil. Like mankind evolving and reaching towards a new life in space, the new generation of Reploids have now evolved to the point where they truly have free will, and that includes the free will to be evil. Still, X and the Maverick Hunters can't simply let Lumine destroy the world. After all, there's probably some humans on it still. Maybe, there's gotta be, right? The game references humans occasionally, but we haven't seen any actual humans since Dr. Kane. Maybe they're all underground, raving out in Zion. Lumine's boss fight is hard but predictable, using moves from the 8 Maverick bosses. He takes on an angelic form, as opposed to Sigma's demon form prior. You'd think there might be some significance to this, but considering they had the same ideals and goals, the whole demon and angel thing are really just kind of trite, meaningless symbols here. Our heroes defeat Lumine, and as he dies, he freezes into an unnecessarily creepy pose. I don't know if this was intentional, or if it was just made uncanny from PS2 graphics, but either way, it'll give me some nightmares tonight. Lumine gets one more pot shot at Axel, knocking him out, but not killing him. This goes absolutely nowhere, and I cannot fathom why it was added. X and Zero ride the elevator back down to Earth. Zero gives X some encouraging words like he always does, something to the effect of, hey, whatever happens, we have to keep fighting the good fight, right X? And then that's it. The game ends with the title Mega Man X8 and the subtitle Paradise Lost, as if that was the subtitle of the game the whole time when it wasn't. Like I mentioned earlier, the story heavily relies on comparing itself to John Milton's epic poem, and I could really only connect a few tenuous threads together. In the poem, Lucifer tricks Adam and Eve into eating the forbidden fruit, and afterwards, they're kicked out of paradise. The fruit itself is from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, I'm no biblical scholar, but there's plenty of people that interpret that story as a metaphor for the loss of innocence, and how once you see the world for what it is, you could no longer live in the paradise of blissful ignorance. Reploids are kind of like Adam and Eve before eating from the tree. They live only to be subservient to their creators. Once they go maverick and start thinking for themselves, they're hunted down and destroyed. By X8, the new generation Reploids are taking their destinies into their own hands, choosing to burn down the tree and create their own paradise on a different world. That's about where the comparisons end, for me at least, and that honestly is a bit of a stretch. I think a lot of times Japanese storytellers like to use Western iconography and Christian symbols for flair, but rarely for substance. Like the creators of Neon Genesis Evangelion saying they used all those Christian symbols because, quote, they looked cool. In my opinion, this is probably as far as the Paradise Lost allegory goes in X8. So in summary, this story has about as much depth as a New York-style pizza. Forget about it. I'm walking here. There's a few secrets and unlockables in this game, so let's go over them. X gets 2 new armors. The Icarus armor focuses on power and jumping, and the Hermes armor focuses on speed and agility. And once again, X gets his ultimate armor, and Zero gets his black armor. This time, Axel gets his own unlockable, the white armor. The best secret in X8, though, is that the 3 navigators, Alia, Lair, and Palette, can all be unlocked as playable characters. It just isn't easy. You have to play through the game once, and on a second playthrough, the option to unlock them will take the form of their weapon, which you will have to pay 40,000 medals for. To put that in perspective, I got about 40,000 medals after beating the majority of the game and not using any of the medals to upgrade anyone. so really, it almost took 2 playthroughs to do this. The specific operator that you unlock is going to be whomever you used the most in the previous playthrough. I could be wrong, but I think to unlock the other 2, you need to use them more often than the others, meaning that between that requirement and the high metal price, you'll have to play the game at least a few times in order to get all 3 navigators. The girls pretty much play the same as the guys, they're really just model swaps. Paulette replaces Axel, Alia replaces X, and Layer replaces Zero. It's a good time, it just takes way too long to unlock them. But hey, you could also get them using an input code on the title screen, so there's that. Apparently, these girls made history, as it was the first time Capcom added playable females in a mainline Mega Man game. Good job breaking the glass ceiling, girls. Too bad X8 was the last game in the series. This is like adding Paget Brewster to the last season of Community. This woman is a treasure, why are you wasting her on this last season nonsense? When the game released in 2004, it was met with mixed reviews. You'd think after X7 people would be stoked about a return to form, but instead, everyone was kinda just done with the series. Enthusiasm was clearly waning, and reviews and sales reflected that. I made it pretty clear in the previous video that I thought X7 was just absolutely horrible, so how does X8 hold up by comparison? I've heard a lot of people say that it's absolutely amazing, but it's certainly no X1 or X4. It's miles better than X7, and that huge whiplash in quality probably makes it seem even better than it is. To me, X8 took all the things that people hated about the previous games and removed or changed them, which is good. The clunky 3D gameplay was removed, but the 3D graphics were kept. The new character Axel came back, but this time he actually feels great to play as. But the thing is, it's not enough to just fix the mistakes. There's a palpable lack of heart in this game, both in the story and the overall execution of how everything plays out in X8. The game feels weirdly rushed. From the boss intros to the cutscenes, it feels like the game is trying to get you in and out as fast as possible. And I think the reason for that is that the game doesn't want you to spend too much time focusing on its weaknesses, like that the story sucks or that the Maverick bosses aren't very interesting. Don't get me wrong, X8 has a sort of charm to it, but it's a game that feels tired. Like, okay, we're doing this again, we're fighting Vile again, we're fighting Sigma again, but sadly, no amount of enhanced graphics or anime titties could save the franchise. It was too little, too late. Released in 2018 as a follow-up to the Mega Man Legacy Collection, the X Legacy Collection has quite a lot to distinguish itself from the 2006 X Collection. The X Legacy Collection came in 2 parts, splitting the series between 1 through 4 and 5 through 8. Since 7 and 8 were released after the first X Collection, this is the first time we're seeing all of them together in one place. The collection uses the SNES version of X3, thank God, and the bosses in X5 finally have their proper, non-Guns N' Roses sounding names. So long, Duff McWhalen. Hello, Tidal Whale. The Japanese voices are also restored in X6. it's pretty clear by this point Capcom simply doesn't know what it wants to do with X6. One really cool feature is the option to play each game in either its English or Japanese release. So if you're sick of Mega Man and would prefer playing as Raku Man instead, you have that option. A Rookie Maverick Hunter option was also included. This is basically an easy mode that could be toggled on and off at will from the pause menu. It's actually really impressive how much thought was put into this. Damage is halved, spikes and pits don't kill you, and certain areas of each game were specifically modified to accommodate a better playing experience. So the jet ski and snowmobile levels, for example, are slowed down. That's what I call going the extra mile. Thank you, Capcom. Now please fix the sudden drop-off in Volt Kraken's stage, I am begging you. A brand new gameplay mode was created just for this release called the X Challenge, which is a boss gauntlet where the player takes on not one, but two Mavericks simultaneously. This might seem like absolute chaos, but fortunately, the combination of Mavericks and their attack patterns seem to have been specifically chosen to allow it to work and not be game-breaking. This is honestly a pretty fun mode, but of course, it's very, very hard. I mean, you could fight Colonel and the General at the same time, or Sigma and Zero. It's nuts. X even had a shiny new armor designed just for this mode. There's also some quality of life enhancements, like adding wallpapers for the screen borders and a selection of screen filters. I like using the CRT filter because I'm fancy. One big shortcoming of the original X collection was the skimpy amount of gallery and music unlockables. Well, the Legacy collection fixed that by including just about every piece of concept, promotional, or whatever art and music that existed from X1 through 8. Unlocking concept art in games is exactly my cup of tea, so I was pretty pleased with the abundance of it here. There's even images of old X merchandise and TV trailers from the games. Maverick Hunter X wasn't included, unfortunately, but the Day of Sigma OVA was, so that's a really nice bonus. Trophy modes and achievements were included as well. I couldn't care less about trophies, but I know a lot of people do, so that's a nice inclusion. I didn't mention this in the X Collection portion of the video, but due to copyright issues, all the non-Capcom music was replaced. So one benefit of playing the original games, like X4 on the PS1, is that you'll get to listen to freaking jams such as Makane Ai ga Kito Iro, or There Must Exist Unbeatable Love. I can't play it because YouTube will demonetize my video, but trust me, it's a good song, guys. Go listen to it. Instead, in the Legacy Collection, we get boring, generic instrumental themes. Freaking boo. That last problem aside, Capcom has been killing it lately with these Legacy Collections, and hopefully, this paves the way for a Mega Man Legends collection. Fingers crossed. Overall, this is a stellar package, and I'm not sure what else they could have added to make it more perfect, besides, adding the spin-off games. If you want a marathon through all the mainline X games, this is the way to do it. Anyone that knows me well enough can tell you that I don't like mobile games. I especially don't like gacha games. For the layman, that means free-to-play games that are designed around enhancements or upgrades that cost real money. These games are designed around exploiting people who lack impulse control, and even worse, gambling addicts, into draining their wallets from microtransactions.
Premium! The meum is Latin for not really.
Maybe this exploitative practice could be forgiven if the gameplay was actually good, but most mobile games are just utter garbage designed for mass appeal. So, with all that being said, I actually kinda liked Mega Man X Dive.
It's not true! That's impossible!
Released in 2020, this mobile game had online support for about 4 years. Afterwards, it was re-released for Steam and mobile in an offline form, appropriately called Mega Man X Dive Offline. That's the version I played. The story is basically that you, the player, are a big Mega Man fan, and oh no, there's suddenly a break in the space-time continuum or whatever, and now you're in the game. Except, all the Mega Man games have been scattered around, and bosses are appearing in the wrong levels, and everything's all mixed up. But by playing through the stages, you'll be able to correct them to their original state. Look, the story is fucking terrible, and it really doesn't even try. I mean, the story really does not even try to make sense or be good at all. But then again, it's a Mega Man X game. Are we really doing this for the story? I think Capcom knows its audience. And speaking of which, remember when I said in the X8 video how Capcom decided to embrace full-on horniness and fan service? Well, this game is the full manifestation of that. From the completely superfluous assistant character Rico, really? To the abundance of, well, weeb shit. For example, Alia and Lair both get swimsuit outfits and bridal outfits. Hey Capcom, how about a female Reploid that's a doctor or a president, huh? Despite this technically being an X game, it pulls material from other Mega Man games as well. The gameplay is most similar to the X games, so maybe that's why it's called X. But if you're a Battle Network or Legends or even ZX fan, you'll see some series representation. There's literally dozens of characters to play as, and they're beautifully rendered in 3D, supposedly using the same engine from the Maverick Hunter X game. As a Mega Man fan, it's amazing seeing not just X1 through 6 characters in full 3D, but Battle Network and others as well. And they really don't skimp out either. Everyone has a good amount of special moves, and each character has their own voiceovers, not to mention brand new avatar artwork as well. The sheer amount of original artwork and 3D modeling for this game is incredible, and for a mobile game especially, it's just crazy. The X games existed in a time period before we really had good promo or concept art preservation, so to see all these Mega Man IPs in full HD is pretty special. To make a comparison, Fire Emblem Heroes is a very similar game in theory. It's a mobile gacha title where you're collecting characters from all the different Fire Emblem games. A big appeal to that game is that there was mountains of original art made for these pre-existing characters. And while I love that idea, the art styles they picked really didn't reflect the original characters at all. They also chose multiple design styles from different artists, which made the whole thing feel like a giant hodgepodge of fan art. Conversely, all of Dive's art feels like it comes from the same artist. The style is cohesive throughout, which I really appreciate. Another reason why Dive works better than something like Heroes is that the gameplay is a better recreation of its source material. In Heroes, you're playing these really dumb, watered-down versions of Fire Emblem battles, but it's like going from chess to playing tic-tac-toe. In Dive, the basic gameplay of the X series is replicated pretty dang well. That being said, it took me a long time to get used to the controls. I do not like tapping on a screen to play a game. I need buttons. Fortunately, there is an option to remap the buttons if you have a controller, and the gameplay seems to be slowed down and designed around the limitations of what a player can manage on a phone. So basically, for a phone game, it controls as well as it can. You could run, do wall jumps, and use your primary and secondary weapons. It controls well enough, and the stages are designed around the sort of platforming you could reasonably do by tapping on a phone. It's a little bit of a watered-down Mega Man experience in that way, at least at first. As the game gets more difficult, the core gameplay evolves pretty significantly, but we'll get into that in a minute. Rather than the 8 Maverick bosses, you'll instead go through a handful of worlds with short individual levels which are about a minute long. At first this seems a little tedious, but as the levels progress, the difficulty ramps up pretty extremely, and the shorter levels start to make more sense. You're gonna need to strategize in order to survive. This game doesn't give you much in terms of health or healing items, so you'll need a character who is not only completely decked out, but who is constantly getting upgraded in order to keep up with the ramping difficulty of the game. Some of these bosses are legitimately hard. This is where the other half of the gameplay takes place. Basically, everything about how you play this game is customizable. From the characters you bring into battle, to the weapons they use, to the special moves they use, to the special moves the weapons use, to the special moves that the special moves use. It's a lot.
I'm a dude playing a dude disguised as another dude!
And honestly, the biggest detriment to this game, in my opinion at least, is that they really don't explain anything. Customizing and leveling up a character or weapon is one thing, but cards and chips really should have been explained because there's really a lot of nuance to them. Plus, you'll be getting all sorts of collectibles in the form of different jewels and microchips and other stuff, and I'm to this day not sure what half of this stuff does. As much as I love customizing stuff, the micromanaging could be a bit much, especially when it's drawn out for the sake of being drawn out. Like, to unlock a character, you'll need currency that is specific to that character, called memories. So if you want to unlock Lair, you'll need 30 Lair memories. If you want to unlock Palette, you'll need 30 Palette memories. Why couldn't they just have one unified currency? Well, I have to imagine the reason for this is to soak in as much microtransactions as possible.
Hello, I like money.
And considering the ramping difficulty and how you pretty much have to upgrade everything in order to advance, I can see myself blowing through a lot of microtransactions here.
Money!
Fortunately, the offline version of the game makes points and rewards more reasonable to attain, so the pay-to-win aspect is completely removed. Incidentally, if you played the original mobile game and invested a bunch of time and money into the characters and power-ups,
congratulations, you played yourself.
None of that will transfer to offline. For me, it didn't matter because I just discovered the game, but for those players that got super invested since 2020, you'll probably be a little pissed that you've got to start from scratch. There's also a few modes removed from the original version of the game that inherently wouldn't work in an offline mode, like player versus player or online ranking stuff. This isn't a big deal to me, but it's worth mentioning. The special events and limited edition stuff, however, like holiday-related costumes, are all included. So if a New Year-themed cinnamon is your jam, you should be pretty pleased. You all remember cinnamon, right? Cinnamon. Don't get me wrong though, there is fun to be had with all the micromanaging of your character. The player's limited health and the difficulty of the enemies means you'll have to think pretty strategically about which cards and chips and weapons to equip, and for which scenario. An especially hard boss might mean equipping a card that gives you bonus attack power, specifically against bosses. For a level with a lot of hard-to-reach enemies, a homing missile might be the best weapon to bring. I mentioned the story being bad, and I mean it. The story freaking stinks. I'm very obsessive over completing things for the sake of completing things, so I'll watch a movie I've started or finish a book that's not particularly good just to see what happens. This may be the only game I've ever played where I skipped the cutscenes. The writing is like if someone made a fan fiction of X6's English dub, so it's just a version of a translation, basically. But like I said, I'm not exactly playing a Mega Man game for the story. Still, it would have made the game feel more complete if the story at least tried a little. Mega Man X Dive really is a game for the fans. It's been a lot of fun playing 3D versions of X1 stages, listening to X4 songs, and playing as X8 characters, all at the same time. Even a lot of the bosses have their same attack patterns. It kinda does feel like an authentic Mega Man experience. This is a game that obviously has a pretty strong foundation in nostalgia. There's a lot of Easter eggs and deep cuts here, like getting to unlock Dark Mega Man from Legends and he's kicking a soda machine, or selecting Proto Man and his little whistle theme plays. There's a lot of ways the game could have cut corners, but instead it went out of its way to provide as much fan service as possible. And also, it threw in a bunch of crazy stuff like this inexplicable Zero Dance, and I'm all for it. Mega Man X Dive is a surprisingly good time. It's not a proper X game or anything, but there's still a lot of cool things here that Ultra fans will appreciate. You could certainly do worse for a mobile game. And so that concludes the Mega Man X series. Considering the last X game, if you don't count Dive, came out more than 20 years ago, I think it's fair to say the series is dead, and will probably stay that way. Which is a shame because it's a really special series which revolutionized action platformers, and it's probably the series that really got me into video games. Sure, Super Mario World was my first game, but Mega Man X was who I was pretending to be on the playground at recess, and I would bet that plenty of others had similar experiences in their childhood. I played every Mega Man X game for this video series, a few of which I didn't grow up with and was experiencing for the first time. I'd probably rank them from worst to best as follows. 7 is obviously at the very bottom. Man, what a freaking pile of steaming dog that game is. 6 is next. I like the aesthetic of this game, but that nightmare system is just unbearable. 8 I thought was just okay. I know a lot of X fans will die on a hill for this game, and I can't help but wonder if it isn't just because it immediately followed 7. Like, when your mom starts dating Craig after finally leaving your abusive father, and she gushes on and on and on about what a great guy Craig is, and it's like, Craig is not a great guy. He's fine, Mom. He's just fine. 2 and 3 are tied for me. 2 I found to be kind of uncreative and didn't change anything from X1's formula, but that's also a strength depending on how you look at it. 3 lets you play as Zero, which is great, but I found the stages and bosses to just be too grungy and bleak and thought they lacked charm. 5 is a great game that's handicapped by stupid decisions, like having Aelia talk constantly, or naming all the bosses after Guns N' Roses when it should have been Smash Mouth.
Somebody!
X5 started to explore Zero's connection with Wily and possibly how characters from the original timeline could still be alive. This could have been really interesting, but then of course X6 decided to do nothing with it. 4 is a real banger in my opinion. The music rocks, the gameplay is solid, and there's no glaring issues that prevent the player from enjoying the game. It's also the first X game that let you play the entire game as Zero, and that wasn't small potatoes back then. It was big potatoes. Lastly, of course, the original Mega Man X is the best in the series. Short and sweet, solid gameplay, no gimmicks, just a perfect, well-rounded action platformer. I've honestly played Mega Man X more than any other game. I think I've beaten it like a dozen times now, and it's always a good time. So, how would you rank the series? Let me know in the comments section. And if it isn't 7, then 6, then 8, then 2, then 3, then 5, then 4, then 1, I will tell you that you are a fool and a joker, and I'll spit on you and shove you to the floor like the trash that you are. You make me sick. Anyways, thanks for sticking around for so long. I'd also like to thank my patrons, David Saperstein, Zen, Curious Curse, Bosick, Chaz Pazenko, and Jilly Mays. If you like this video, go check out my other ones. Thanks for watching.